Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural. We appreciate you being here. My name is Dr. Stacey N.C. Grant, and we want to thank all of our viewers for sharing this broadcast, for letting us know that it's been impactful with the information that our two expert attorneys share with you every single week, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So with that being said, let me introduce our co-host, Mr. Edward Pichado, Esquire, and Royce Esquire.
Peace.
So there is so much going on. We have to just jump right into it. We have follow-up from what we discussed last week when we talked about paroles. We also know that in the news, there's a direct news story that we'll be delving into that relates to that conversation. And then all of our hearts are heavy once again. Rest in peace to Jacob Blake. We're praying once again for the families and the communities that are continuously affected by excessive force. And well, I'll just wait till we get to that part of it because I don't even know what to say anymore. I've been praying all day for the right words because the frustration and the trauma, we get traumatized over and over and over again. We would think after everything we've seen in the first 2 quarters of this year, that at this point, we'd be moving in a different direction. But over to you, Mr. Pichado Esquire, so you can give your greetings and, buenas, what are we, noches or tardes? What part of the day are we in now?
Buenas tardes, todo el mundo. My name is Edward Pichado, abogado. Se habla español aquí. How you doing, everyone? Glad to have you here this afternoon. Looking forward to a wonderful, fulfilling, and above all, informative program.
Well, let me jump on in and say hello to everybody, the faithful listeners, the newcomers, first time. Well, hopefully it won't be your last time. This show is all about the culture and legal meeting. It's about informing our community. It's about being truth tellers. And so, in this episode, some truth is going to be told. And I want us to make sure that we understand what my position is, what Mr. Pichado's position is, what Dr. Grant's position is, in reference to the things that has gone on and continue to go on in America. But we're going to have the conversation because the conversation needs to be had. And unlike many organizations that might be led by other people that are not us and don't look like us, but lead organizations that's supposed to be for the embetterment of us, we're going to lead this. It's about us, and we're going to lead this conversation, and we're going to do the talk and walk the walk as we go through this program. So welcome, everybody. Can't wait till we get started. So let's get started.
Right? Absolutely. And, the fact that last week, every week, we get feedback, but one of the things that we really appreciate with our two expert attorneys is that they break down the law. They break down what's happening so that you can understand it and you can be empowered to have intelligent discussion and conversation about what's happening legally in our communities, because we know the disparities that exist, and we have two servants basically that are here to serve our community and help advocate for and litigate on our behalf so that we can achieve justice and then understand as well how to support others that are going through challenges. So hey, Richard Russell II, thank you, and thank you for the compliment on the magazine cover. Hey, Lydia, thank you for joining in. John Johnson, what's up, my ALP brother? Good to see you as well. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you're sharing this broadcast and letting folks know that they can get this kind of content every single Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, Mr. Russell, last week you broke down with Mr. Pichado the whole idea of what parole means, and there were some other summary thoughts that you wanted to share before we talk about a current event that is dealing with parole. And Mr. Pichado is all set to go with the racial disparities on that case. So over to you.
Yeah. It's no doubt that we move closely with time, right? At the time that we talked about parole and we went through from what I call the A to Z, the soup to nuts on parole, little did we know, although we're in the news and we're doing many things, that there would be an article forthcoming or shortly before our program dealing with the two killers, murderers of Michael Jordan's father, and one of them being set for parole sometime in the year of 2023. I just want to make sure that we have some continuity, although we do want to speak to the incident that happened in Milwaukee, or happening in the Midwest in reference to Brother Blake. But just to round out some of the things that we were saying, to our astonishment, we realized that in order to become a board member, to sit on the board for parole, you didn't have to have certain criteria, right? But to be a field parole officer, or to be what we call an institutional parole officer, you had many requirements, from having, passed the civil service exam, having to have accolades in sociology and criminology, having to be proficient in the use of firearms. You happen to be between the age of 21 and 40, background in corrections. The list goes on and on and on. And my critical thinking says one position which is appointed by the government, and usually we're not the people that get appointed to those positions, you have very little requirements. My critical thinking points to the occupation where we would probably have more access to, which is the field parole officer or the institutional parole officer. You have all of these requirements. Now, one side of my brain says it's necessary because you're dealing with the parolee. You need that information. The other side of my brain says that's some bullshit. The other side of my brain said that's some keeping people out of positions and keeping people away from guarding the gate, keeping people out of positions of power, although it not be a member of a parole board, but a person in power that understands the community, understands our community. So I thought that was quite curious and quite interesting. But I go on from there, right? That there's people probably in our community that have family members that are up for parole. And so soon they'll get what they call an open date. And what is the definition of an open date? Is the date that you will be released, the date that you kind of re-enter into society, and you'll have to deal with that field officer, and you would have already dealt with that institutional parole officer. But for those that are not that fortunate and they receive a denial, then they have to wait another 2 to 5 years in order to once again appear before the parole board. Now, like any legal process, if you deny parole, you have a right to appeal. You have 30 days to do such. And there is a parole appeals board, and that's a 3-member board that determines whether or not your ruling or your denial should be overturned. Once again, I'm thinking critically and I'm thinking culturally. Who are these people that sit on the appeals board? Where do they come from? Anybody comes from the Bronx? Or is everybody upstate in Orange County? Do they all sit in Albany? Or does somebody come from 135th Street? I want to know who sits on those boards that make those decisions that can give our people, if we're talking about our people, because I'm not going to assume everybody incarcerated is a black and brown color, but if you're talking about our people, can make the right call, can say, you know what, this person can do better because this person knows better. And so I always bring that up because for me, culture and cultural issues are always in the forefront of almost everything that we do. Legally, socially, we see it in law enforcement. We're going to see it on this show. Who gets what opportunities, how much rent is, you name it, culture plays a role in it. But I digress. We also have family members or know people in the community that violate parole. And what does that mean? What happens when you violate parole? So, clear-cut, simple definition. Parole, you have certain rules and regulations that you need to follow. No drugs, stay away from other felons, can't carry a gun, have to at least try to either go to school or have gainful employment. Some people may have curfews. Some people can't live in a household where there's a gun located. Obviously, you can't commit a crime. So what happens when you violate one of the conditions of parole? Well, depending upon what you're doing, you go back to jail. Now, the question becomes, for how long? Well, that depends on your parole officer. And that depends upon what your back half of your criminal sheet, as they call it, or history looks like. Easy answer is that you go back and you do the remaining of your time. You're supposed to serve 5 years, 2 years you got out. You got the rest of the 3 years on parole. You mess up, you go back, you do the 3 years. And you might do a little extra for the violation, 2 years, 90 days, something.
Ed. Now, Royce, there is some due process with respect to that. Let's say you get arrested for a joint, let's say, and you're locked up, and the question is your parole officer going to put a hold on you for not? Is he or she going to make you serve the remainder of your time, or let you go after a short stint? Do you get a hearing regarding that?
And so the answer to your question is yes, there's always due process. And to define what a parole hold is that if you get locked up for a joint, let's just keep it very simple and very basic. You're on parole for a robbery, you owe the state another 3 years, you did 2 years, so you got 3 years that you're on parole. The police officers come, they sweep the building, you happen to be in front of the building, you have a marijuana joint on, you have a blunt on you. You're arrested. That's drugs. Depending upon your relationship with your parole officer, depending upon how you're doing while you're on parole, a decision will be made whether you will be violated, because one of the conditions of parole is not to have drugs on you or to smoke drugs or to take drugs. There is a due process element of that. You will have a parole hearing. There are lawyers that practice in that area, that practice in whether or not there is actually a violation based upon your arrest. And so in a case like this, there may not be any probable cause or any reason for why you were arrested among everybody else standing in front of the building, because standing in front of the building is not a crime. Or you were walking into the building and you just got swept up with everyone else. That is not a crime. So that is a scenario where the parole violation might be lifted. But there are scenarios where it might be enforced and you are violated. Ed mentioned parole hold. Let me define that. Parole hold says if a judge allows you to go on your recognizance, you go before the judge, he says it's only a joint, we want to release you on your own recognizance. You turn around, you give a wink to your boo, and you get ready to put on your belt buckles and head out the door. And guess what happens? Court officer says, not so fast.
What you mean?
Not so fast.
Come on, the judge said.
Sir, I'm going to tell you one more time. Can you please step back?
No, what do you mean?
Then he gives the wink to his co-worker, and the cuffs come. And you say, what's this all about? Sir, I'm sorry. You have a parole hold. See, parole hasn't made a decision whether or not they're going to violate you. And it's 3 a.m. in the morning and you're just seeing the judge and your parole officer's sleeping. So we won't know whether or not he's going to violate you until tomorrow or maybe next week. So there is no bail. You cannot skip out the door. We're locking you. You going to Rikers. You going to Manhattan Correctional. If you're in Jersey, you going to Bergen County. If you in Wisconsin, you going to Polk County, whatever. You sitting for a minute.
Royce, what about
decisions could be made?
What about when you get that call that I paid the bail or not?
Well,
you talked about personal recognizance,
right? And so now, here's the other animal that sits and lurking behind the door, right? Your family wants to pay the bail, but then somebody says, don't pay the bail because he has a parole hold. So even if you put up that money, he's not going anywhere. And we also know that there's always, or at least in most cases, there's choices to be made when it comes down to bail, right? Do I put the money up for bail or do I put the money up for the lawyer? And those are real life decisions. And so if you're on parole and you get violated, just because you and your parole officer have a good relationship, just because he's your man's in them, don't mean nothing. It can count up to be a count of beans when the judge decides that the hold is on. So I'm looking over because I want to make sure that I didn't forget anything, because one of the things that I want to make sure is that since the subject matter is so vast And there are so many questions, and you can feel free to ask those questions during the show. You can ask them later on Facebook, R2 ESQ2. Be more than happy to answer those questions. But what is a violation? Ed mentioned having drugs, coming upstairs late past your curfew, constant unemployment, even though it might not be your fault. Any type of domestic violence issue, you and your young lady get into an argument, and the police are called. What they call generally bad acts. So a bad act could be almost anything. So that puts you in a very precarious situation where you have to walk a straight line all day, every day. And if you are a violent felony offender and your parole is violated, you can rest assured that you will be going back to jail for the rest of your time. And so I think for me, that kind of wraps up where we are with parole, because my feet is burning and my hands are burning, because I know there's another subject matter that we need to discuss, or else we wouldn't be speaking legally if we did.
Well, before we jump into the parole, the wrap up of the parole with this current case, with parole, and you went down all the litany of things that you cannot do. When does, just so everyone is clear, does a parole ever expire? Is it?
Yes, it does. It does. That's a very good question. So let's talk about that briefly. There is what we call early parole release and expiration. That means you're doing such a wonderful job on parole, there's no need to monitor you. And so therefore, your parole is cut. Now, we have to understand there's money to be made in every industry. Profit rules. Profit rules. And if you know what I mean, then you know that early release is far and few in between. Because what's the purpose? Right? I'm not trying to cut down the work that I have. Poverty and profit, prison and profit goes hand in hand. And so, yes, you can get released from parole early. It doesn't happen that often. And then parole does end if, once again, we go to my example, burglary, serve 5 years. You have the sentence of 5 years. You did 2. You have 3 on the back end. 3 years are over. Your parole is over.
But what about the restitution?
That's a situation that you need to handle while you're on parole, and there are occasions where parole could be extended based upon you not fulfilling that requirement.
Did you pay the fine?
Ed, you're going to let me off of parole one way or the other, sir. I don't know what you're trying to do, but I know that I'm going to get off parole one way or the other. And
for that joint, we extended your time. So.
And what he's speaking to is all the things that could come up that just extend your time. And I believe it was brother, is it Meek Mills? He knows about that, right? I mean,
needed extensions.
Yes. Time after time, he would either be accused of violating or maybe have a small violation. And what the court would do would extend and extend and extend this time to a point where those in the know started to take notice of it and became something in the public eye. And, then it became newsworthy. But just so we all know, this happens to people all day, every day. Meek Mills just happened to have a microphone near him and some people that support him, that gave him the voice or was help to shine the light on a situation that happens every single day. And so now look at here. Man convicted of killing Michael Jordan's father, granted parole.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, as a lot of people probably saw from the recent documentary on the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan, there was a time period where he left the sport of basketball, and many people said that was because of the death of his father, the murder of his father. And so, not too long after that, this story comes out about one of the those who were convicted of the crime being released on parole, Larry Demery. Now, what probably a lot of people don't know is that basically what happened here is Michael Jordan's father, James Jordan, was found. Apparently, he was shot while he was sleeping in his car. That's the understanding of the incident. And then, you know, these two individuals after that get rid of the body, take the car, go joyriding. They take his jewelry. They're using his cell phone, and eventually they get caught. Now, Larry Demery, who's white, testifies against his co-defendant, Daniel Green, who I believe didn't testify. And he says that Daniel Green was the one who shot the shot, you know, called the shots when it came to disposing of the body, which was apparently so badly discomposed that, you know, they eventually, you know, cremated him. You know, some people argue prematurely because there was a lot of evidence that should have been gathered before that. The only thing that was kept was Mr. Jordan's dental, his teeth, you know, in terms of his dental records, which were, you know, he had quite a bit of extensive work done on his mouth, which should have revealed to the authorities that he was a wealthy man or someone who was of money, and especially, you know, given the car that the young people were caught in. But nonetheless, Demery gets parole. Daniel Green is not. Larry Demery is white. Daniel Green is black. Some people will say it has nothing to do with that. Larry Demery.
And you said some people will say. Who's those some people?
Yeah.
Well, some legal critics will say that no, Daniel Green didn't confess, didn't take responsibility for what quote unquote he did. He's been maintaining his innocence for the last 27 years. In fact, he's been asking.
Wasn't his story? Wasn't Mr. Green's story was that Demery called him?
Yeah, Danny Green is saying that he was at a party till about 4 a.m. Larry Demery comes to him at the party nervous, saying, listen, I got into it with this guy and I shot him. I need you to help me get rid of the body. Danny Green says, okay, you my mans in them. Let's go take care of this, you know, because you my guy. And then, you know, he's claiming that, you know, Larry Demery flipped the script on him.
So this
And,
is,
you know,
let me stop you there. This is a perfect example of, and you're a criminal defense attorney like I am, right? And, you know, we're always faced with whether or not they're going to call it snitching or whether or not you should cooperate. And we're going to save that for another show. But let's just highlight, this is an example of the first person who reaches first base is usually the person that goes home. It's simple. It's baseball. You got first base, second base, third base, home. If I get to first base first, I'm going home. And between these two right here, Demery got to first base first.
So much for loyalty.
He's going home.
So much for loyalty. So, you know, one of them has been granted parole, like you said, 2023. The other is fighting for his innocence and trying to get out that way. You know, let's see how this unfolds. This happened in the state of North Carolina. I believe Jordan was found dead in Lumberton, North Carolina. There's you know, there's a lot of issues with this case. I would welcome anyone to really take a closer look. There's quite a few articles. Years ago, I read a very interesting GQ magazine article on this incident that really piqued my interest about, you know, some of the funny facts in this case. So I think it's an interesting read.
And what is also interesting is that, as we stated before, Demery now has what we call an open date. He has an open date. He's granted, so far, parole, August 2023. A lot can happen between now and 2023 where that open date can close. And
based on good behavior.
That's right. That's right. So everything is contingent upon things falling in the right step, right? No more issues in jail, no court with drugs, no altercation, no disciplinary sanctions whatsoever. Because if any of those things go to the left, it'll be denied.
So let's back it up a little bit. So he's able to go for parole. Now, Ed, I just want you to go back on what you were talking about with Daniel. Is he choosing not to go before the parole board because he's fighting for his innocence, or is there some interesting business happening why he is not up for parole?
Well, I'll admit I haven't read all of the documents in this case, but my legal mind tells me my thought is here is that they're looking at whether or not he is taking responsibility or not. That's a big factor in the granting of parole in many of these cases, because both of these guys got convicted to life imprisonment. And so, Daniel Green, he's been maintaining his innocence. And so, and he, like I said, he asked for a review of the evidence. He asked for hearing trial. But I think that may be a factor in him not being granted that parole, and Larry Demery, on the other hand, being granted, parole or a date, as Royce stated. So I believe that that's the factor here. That's the legal factor that's causing Green not to be granted the parole. And they're also gonna I guess, say from the trial transcript also that Green's activities were more egregious if you believe Demery's testimony at trial, that Green was the one who was the shooter, that Green was the one who called the shots, and that Larry Demery was just kind of there, following him. So, because a lot of this is fact-driven as well with respect to the original crime.
Now, your legal mind says those are the factors. Your cultural mind says what?
My cultural mind says that there's an issue here in terms of race, a clear issue in terms of race, and that's what speaks out to me here, because both of them were convicted of life imprisonment. It was an egregious crime, and it was in the papers, and it's just. I found it. I was kind of taken aback when I saw this article. I was like, "Wow, he's getting parole."
I just want to make sure that it's clear that you cleared your throat on that, because I don't want anybody to get it mistaken that everything is not race, but almost everything is race.
Well, push a pin in that one. Deborah has a question on parole before we move from this conversation, because that definitely smells like basura. But we'll talk about this one from Deborah. What type of parole is for people who are drug defendants, and why or what reason do they keep getting sent back? What are the violations that makes it a point when you get sent back? So that was a good question for Deborah. Thank you for joining us again.
Well, Deborah, what parole has defined as a violation, it is as broad as bad acts. Now that's very broad. What's a bad act? And what I stated previously is that a bad act could be missing curfew, having drugs in the apartment or where your place of residence, even though you may not be doing it, actually doing drugs, actually getting caught with drugs on you, committing a crime, failing to have employment, failing to achieve vocational or academic endeavors. So domestic violence, it could be as innocent as trespassing. All of those acts are considered bad acts for a parole officer to take in consideration as to whether or not you're violated. At the end of the day, we hope that you're not violated if it's small, such as trespassing or having possession of marijuana or something like that on you. But people get paid to do a job, and prison, the Pipeline prison, is for profit. So I don't have a lot of faith in, oh, don't worry about it, I won't get violated. Me and my parole officer is cool. Yeah, all right. Good luck with that.
Exactly, because they're getting paid. So I really am grateful that we are able to break things down for you on this show. And the parole conversation was one chunk of it. There's the probation conversation, but we're going to push a pin in that because of what's happening in real time. And Deborah said, thank you. You are welcome. And Shawnee, good to see you. Thank you for tuning in. So our hearts are heavy once again. In the news, we have lost yet another life.
Have we lost him?
Well, not lost. Let me say we're in danger of losing another life because the reports are still sketchy. So we're praying that it doesn't end up that way. But for those who don't know what's going on, as they say in showbiz, let's play the tape.
This morning, another American city is rocked by outrage over the police shooting of a black man. It was all caught on video. Angry protests led to an overnight curfew in Kenosha, Wisconsin. That's between Milwaukee and Chicago. The man who was shot, 29-year-old Jacob Blake, is now in a Milwaukee hospital. Our national correspondent, Jerika Duncan, has more on this story, and we have to tell you ahead of time, this video, very tough to watch.
This graphic video posted on Facebook shows the moment an encounter between Jacob Blake and Kenosha police quickly escalated. Screams rang out as police fired at least 7 shots Sunday evening. Blake appears to have been shot in the back as he entered the driver's side of an SUV at gunpoint. His children were reportedly in the vehicle. It is unclear whether police believe they saw a weapon.
You know, you got kids and girls and all that, and I never had a problem with them. I always see them every day, parked right behind me on the street.
Local reports suggest Blake was breaking up a fight between 2 women when the police were called. That part of the incident was not caught on camera. A large number of protesters confronted officers in Kenosha Sunday night. In addition to peaceful demonstrations, at least 1 police officer was reportedly attacked when protests turned ugly elsewhere. A countywide curfew was put in place overnight. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers released a statement saying, "We stand with all those who have and continue to demand justice, equity, and accountability for Black lives in our country." Zach Rodriguez, a board supervisor in Kenosha County, said this incident highlights the need for more widespread use of recording devices by police.
What happened here tonight highlights that we.
So it appears that the audio on this part is not working, but we see what happens.
Line of events of police brutality against Black Americans.
We're tired of it. And right now, this is the wrong generation that this is happening to. The frustration is boiling to the top, and we're sick and tired.
That was Jerika Duncan reporting. Very distressing video.
And he's right. We are sick and tired. It's the thing, Anthony, that even if he had a gun and it's not clear to anyone that he did,
Yep.
he's still shot in the back as he's getting in the car.
In the car.
And you see the woman who's jumping outside. There are children in the car. Her children are in the cars. We're all watching this. Thank goodness for the videotape so that we can continue justice in this story.
So Ed, you know, as we get ready to chop this up, and you know, I have some thoughts on it. And who's that? Gail Good? Who's that? Who's
Gail
that?
King.
Gail King. Yeah, ain't that something? We're gonna leave her alone. So Ed, can you give some backdrop and some of your history when it comes down to that area and that part of the US of A?
Yes, I attended law school at Marquette University Law School in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is near that area. It's the major city, the largest city in Wisconsin. And for a lot of people that don't know, Kenosha is not right outside of Milwaukee. I've been hearing a lot of reports about that. What happens is that you have Milwaukee, and then you have this county called Racine that's south of Milwaukee, and then you have Kenosha, which is the southernmost county, and then you have Illinois. Now, also let me also inform the audience too that my first job as a lawyer was as a public defender, Wisconsin State Public Defender in the city of Racine. And let me just provide some background here. Now, Kenosha is a small city. It has about 100,000 people in it, and 10% of them are Black, 16% of them are Latino. Now, the county where I was practicing in, which is just north of it, has 78,000 people, 22% of them Black, 20% Latino. And then you have Milwaukee, which has like a population of 600,000, 40% Black, 18% Latino. And then even there, you've only had, with this large black population, you've only had historically one black mayor, and he served office for about a month because he was taking over the completed term of the white mayor who left, and then lost the primary against, Tom Barrett, who's the current white mayor there now. So, historically, the black people in this area have been very disempowered. There's a history of police brutality in this area. The American Civil Liberties Union did an extensive report that they came out recently on the history of police brutality in Milwaukee and the surrounding areas. Just, a real problem. My concern here, Royce, is that given the facts of this case and what will happen if we do charge these officers, they get a right to a jury trial. And, what kind of jury makeup are you going to have here with, this majority white population in Kenosha County? I'm thinking that, the defense attorney here is going to be able to argue, and somebody may buy it, or a member of this community, or members of this community, some members, because you only need a hung jury, right, Royce?
You only need it.
Yeah, that may buy it, that, hey, listen, he wasn't listening to the officers. He reached into the car. They didn't know what was going to happen, and so they started shooting. And and that's what I'm concerned is going to happen here.
Well, I hear your concern, and it's a concern that maybe, hopefully, we would have, because right now no one has been arrested, no one has been charged. The ball is still bouncing in the street. Cornbread Earl and me, the screams are still very prevalent and in the ear, and justice looks like it's a far way from being served. Now, having said all of that, I would say this, is that I don't think I've seen anything on Facebook, anything on Twitter, IG, and you and I having personal conversations that would lead anybody to believe that Brother Jacob, Brother Blake did anything criminally wrong and did anything to deserve being shot in the back.
Absolutely.
Times. I would say that you, me, Dr. Grant, many others on Facebook and all other media outlets and in communities that are not being heard right now, all agree that these police officers should be arrested, they should be charged, they should go to jail in some shape, form, or fashion, and that is our vision of justice. But having said all that, and speaking to this show, and speaking to the audience, and I have an understanding that we are taking cultural and legal issues and really, 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 really mashing it out. I would be remiss to say that I don't necessarily really want to talk about that end. I don't really want to talk about the officers being charged, what type of charges, why the governor or the mayor is not moving that fast, because we've seen this movie before. And we know that the wheels of justice, when it comes to police officers, move extremely, extremely slow, if it moves at all.
And right now we got a situation where I think it was reported a little earlier that the governor is contemplating accepting assistance from Donald Trump to allow federal agents to assist with, the riots and the disturbances that are taking place, in addition to the National Guard that are being called in. So, I just don't like the way this story is unfolding. And that poor brother right now, the report earlier was that he's paralyzed because his vertebrae was shattered from these bullets. Thank God he's still alive, but you know, what type of life he's going to possibly lead is another disturbing factor here, you know?
Now, Dr. Grant, you have this article up. I would like to, talk around it or talk to it, because then I want to talk about this in a different view, in a different light. And I don't want any distractions of anything else being on the screen, but my face, your face, Ed's face, and the words that are coming out of our mouths, because somebody needs to say it and ain't nobody talking about it.
We're going to say it, but I want to bring this up for folks to know that they can go and look at the record of police brutality. And you were just speaking on that. I mean, this is not new. And the interactions, the only difference of what we're seeing in 2020 is that people are capturing it. People are capturing it on social media. People are capturing on videos. This has been happening time and time again.
And just to highlight, Milwaukee itself, the major city in this area, is one of the most segregated cities in America. In fact, while I was living there, it was visibly clear in a way that I haven't seen in many communities. They have the city divided between north and south by these large, what they call viaducts, which are like these long bridges / roadways that underneath there's like this industrial valley. And if you cross that bridge, immediately you go into another demographic. Black people live on the north side, and basically Latinos and whites live on the south side. And I would hear stories from people who actually grew up there that years before I started living there, that you had to be afraid to go across that bridge as a Black person in terms of what you would encounter on the other side. And, I think anybody who's lived in that area understands and agrees that you have to be very careful where you travel in that area in terms of what, what you're going to be greeted with. So, and keep in mind, this also is in the national spotlight because the Democratic National Convention for this year was seated in Milwaukee. So, there's a lot of dynamics working here in terms of this happening in the confluence of events and the history behind this and the historical, just clashing of events here and the timing of it in this period, in this epoch that we're living in right now.
And the leadership is Democratic, as you can see. And so all eyes are watching. And I'm glad that Dr. Grant, you put this up and you put the video up, and we were able to give Ed's background in reference to him practicing law there. So we have somebody that's right on top of it. His pulse is right there. Mm-hmm. But, I am really at the edge of my seat because I don't know that we can really add more discussion to the part that everybody already knows and is already talking about, which is what does justice look like? And we don't control that right now. And we know that voting is part of controlling it. So I want to talk about what we do control to a certain degree, because the basis for this program and the basis for why we're airing this and the basis for writing a book, Cardiac Arrest, a tactical guide on how to handle unlawful police stops, is to make sure that our community is protected. And protection comes from information, and it comes from the do's and don'ts. It comes from having physical objects on you. Hey, I applaud everyone in our community to go out and register to get a gun. You should. It's your right. Why not? So, we're talking protections in a variety of ways. And so when I look at this, we got to talk about what we have to talk about, or else we're not being truth tellers. And what I'm saying to you, and I don't want anybody to get it twisted. Don't even blow me up, because if you do, then I know you got it twisted. What happened to Brother Blake was wrong. What happened to Brother Blake should not have happened. The police officers used excessive force. They should go to jail. They should be stoned. All the other things that you can think of. Fired, terminated, you name it. Protest, rallies, I'm with it. You got it. But if we see this movie over and over again, and we see it play out in every single state, and we see it play out multiple times in a day, because not too long ago, just a minute or hours from that incident, there was an incident in Louisiana where someone who was suffering mental challenges, they were also shot dead. Now, the Blake story is getting more press, but that happened hours either before or hours later in Louisiana, right? Different touchstones, because we talk about mental challenges, but why does it lead to death? Brown, black folks dying. So what am I really talking about? What I'm really talking about is that we can analyze what went wrong, what the police officers did, how unjust it is, and whether or not they should be charged, and we all know they should be charged. But what is that doing for us as we see this movie played out day in and day out? What are the teachable moments that we're taking away? How are we protecting ourselves? What are we trying to get and understand on who we are in America? And I think that's important, because if you're going to act a certain way, this has nothing to do with Brother Jacob. This has nothing to do with Brother Blake. Nothing whatsoever. This is talking in general and taking a moment that we can teach ourselves. You have to be prepared for every action. There's a reaction. You prepare for the SATs. You prepare for whether or not it's going to rain or snow, the weather outside. You prepare on how to drive a car. You prepare on your rap game if you see a nice woman. You prepare on what you're going to wear when you go out. You prepare your kids for the obstacles in life. Why do we think, as people of color, can leave our doorsteps without being prepared? What is this phenomenon? We have to be prepared. There was no audio, so we can't hear what was going on. Ed, you profoundly and easily stated what was probably happening and what their defense is going to be. We told him to stop. He didn't listen. He kept on walking. We told him several times. Then he went to his car. He opened up the door and he reached down. We feared for our safety, so therefore we shot. We shot several times. The number never come out, because once you fear for your safety, everybody automatically justifies that it was, a proper shooting. But what we don't hear, and I don't know why body cams were not required in that part of the state, but what we don't hear is what is being said. We can anticipate and we can assume what the police was saying. I would have loved to hear what Brother Blake was saying. I would have loved to hear Brother Blake being educated on cardiac arrest, a tactical guide on how to handle unlawful police stops, and say, hey, officer, why do you have your gun out? I pose no threat. I know you're supposed to have your taser out. Why you have your gun out? You may say, Royce, that's ludicrous. What are you talking about? I say, don't be so fast, grasshopper, because that's the first point where you now resetting the table and putting in that officer's mind that you know what's going on. And you know that they're supposed to use the taser. They're not supposed to have their gun drawn. And you know, and you letting them know that you don't pose a threat. And they're supposed to use non-lethal weapons to assist in the arrest. Now, we've seen many other videos. I'm on this soapbox. We've seen many other videos where we see our brothers and sisters tackled to the ground, hit with nightsticks, hit with what they call asps, these metal batons. None of that is used. Mm-hmm. Now, I was speaking to some officers yesterday, ex-officers, and we had a very lively conversation. And it was no doubt they're brown and black folks, and they understood exactly what was going on. They knew wrong from top to bottom. And one of the comments was, well, those officers probably didn't want to do anything because they feared, or the state of mind of officers is not to do anything because they fear what's going to happen to them. So we have options. You could tackle the guy down and the guy lives to see another day, and you can go through whatever administrative proceedings you want to go through and say, hey, look, Blake wasn't listening, so we tackled him. Or you can shoot him and be for sure that something bad should happen to you after this. And so if the conversation was, officer, why you have that gun out? I know you should have your taser out. I'm walking to my car because my kid is in there and it's hot and the windows are rolled up and I need to at least roll the windows down. I would have liked to heard that. That would have been something that I needed to hear. Not because to justify whether it was right or wrong, but it is a form of verifying that we are protecting ourselves, that we are reading and we are knowledgeable, and we are giving these officers opportunities to retreat and not retaliate. And one story that I heard yesterday, an officer was saying that they picked up this guy. The officer was just being an asshole and picked him up. I'm summarizing. The guy had marijuana in his pocket. The guy happened to be a paralegal. And in that car, from the time he was picked up to the time he got to the precinct, that paralegal said, look, man, y'all can do whatever you want, but this case is going nowhere. First of all, you had no reason to stop me. You went in my pockets illegally. So that's a 4th Amendment violation. You violated my 14th Amendment. He rattled off everything. He went through it from soup to nuts. And when that officer went to fudge the paperwork in the precinct, because he did fudge it, so-and-so was smoking a joint, we grabbed him and we found blah, blah, blah. The fellow officer who happened to be Latino, this is the stuff that you don't see internally, but the fellow officer that happened to be Latino, names protect the innocent, said, hey, I took that kid to and from. That kid knows what he's talking about. That paperwork you getting ready to fudge right there to say he was smoking, you better think about that, bro. That fabrication that you getting ready to throw out on a piece of paper, you better think about that, because my man in the back row, he was very articulate.
It sounds like you're talking about individuals making the choice of allowing the justice system to work itself out and to play itself out instead of taking certain, I guess, actions into their own hands.
100%, brother. That's why we here. Are we waiting for somebody else to give us the opportunity? You may never get it. You have to seize the opportunity. You have to take the opportunity. And this mindset that we live in America and we could do anything that we want, just like our fellow white counterparts, is ludicrous. Like, who are we kidding? That is not the case. If I worked at a company and I just started there 7 days ago, and I had a white counterpart that started there 7 days ago, in 3 days he's out for being sick, and I'm out 3 days being sick, you know who's going to get fired. You know that. So I'm speaking to the masses, putting Blake's situation to the side while we have this platform. You have to know what you need to know. I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but it's a place, it's a start. You have to start somewhere. Looking to police to reform themselves is never going to happen, ever. And I don't care no matter how much marching we do. Education and articulating, you know your rights, and putting people on notice. Look, you could play around all you want. You could joke. You could laugh about cardiac arrest. You could say some of the shit that you're talking about, Mr. Russell, really could be summed up. I remember one attorney told me one time, he said, you wrote that book, and that book is 100 and something pages. The only thing you got to say is don't reach, don't run. Oh, yeah, that was very funny for the moment. Really? Don't reach, don't run? Is that your comment? See how far that gets you and see what happens. You guys,
and it's amazing that you say that, because when it comes to police reform, right now, I think I read an article a little earlier that the city council is now looking to review its legislation with respect to, chokeholds and the like, and that's coming from the amount of pressure they're getting from the NYPD in terms of them being able to, quote unquote, properly police and have the ability to do their job.
And we know that the police department is one of the most powerful agencies, at least here in New York and across the world. I mean, they are as powerful as the NRA. So once again, anybody who's listening, who's watching, look, this is one big commercial. but it deserves to be so, you have to purchase cardiac arrest. You have to know the ins and outs. You have to leave your house prepared. Yeah, it might be funny to say, yo, go redo your driver's license and get a different picture. Get a picture that where you don't look the way like you just getting ready to stick up a 7-Eleven. Maybe you smiling, maybe you have a suit and tie on. But I'm telling you right now, those implicit biases that you are unaware of when they look at your driver's license can save you from life and death. The fact that I'm telling you, take a picture of your ID and have it on your phone. So when they ask you for ID and you don't have your wallet, you don't have whatever, at least you can say, I have it on my phone. Yes, it may not be a get out of jail card free, but it's one less excuse that they can use. Your job, our job is to prepare ourselves. And I'm seeing over and over that we're not prepared. So when are we going to prepare ourselves?
For the unfortunate, inevitable situations and encounters when you have the information. That's why the show is what it is. So you know what to do, you know what to say, you know how to record. It's not just getting angry, because our anger has its place in space, but we need something to actually happen as a result of any injustice that any of us are victims of. So reading the book, reading something before you need something, as we say, is important, but it also gives you an opportunity to have conversations with young people, with older adults, with women. It's not just men. Everybody is unfortunately susceptible to being a victim in our community because of all the things that are laid out in the book. And it's a tactical guide. It's something that you can read and utilize, you can keep. We shared, I don't know how many shows ago, about an incident back in December because someone bought cardiac arrest to give to a youth group at a high school in Long Island. And this young man must have had the book. Who knows if he read it, but it was in his car. And he got pulled over, and the cops happened to see the book. And they were like, what's that? And he showed them the book. He took a look at it, looked at his license, threw the book in the back of the car, and told him to just drive off. So we could unofficially say that just having it on his person in his car could have potentially saved him. There's no, we can't write that and guarantee it, but it did have an effect because that officer said, wait, this kid knows a little bit more than the average. So it prompted him to move on to the next person they were going to go harass just by having the book physically in the car. Imagine if you had the knowledge that was in the book and you're able to apply it when these kind of situations happen.
And it's just as simple as sometimes we see on media, right? And I used to laugh at this all the time, but I don't laugh that much because I know it's intentional. Why does the news reporter go to the most ignorant, unarticulate person to find out what happened? Right? Why do they go to the wino? You gonna find out what happened from that dude, right? Right? That's intentional, right? That's intentional. So when that officer realized that this kid had some semblance of what's going on, he decided that I'm gonna go the other way, right? Now, I'm not saying anything is foolproof because I'm not the man upstairs or the woman upstairs. I can't tell you that, but you have to be prepared, point blank. And if we walking around thinking that we can live this life being unprepared in this particular situation, then we are fooling ourselves. And I'll repeat again, this is separate and aside from Brother Blake because he did nothing wrong. But what is the teachable moment that we're taking from this? What are we taking from this? How are we implementing what happened in our lives? How are we teaching someone else what to do and what not to do? I don't know if we reached the point that you can't do anything and it's just, oh, well, let me just throw my hands up in the air. But if that's the case, even let that be intentional.
And one of the things, just to back up my brother Royce here, one of the key here is if you look at that book, you will see a quote, hopefully be able to come out of the situation alive. I remember that. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think everyone in our audience and just anyone in our community has to agree, no matter what, that any one of us that come into these encounters, any of our young men and women that fall into these encounters, we want them to come out alive and safe. And right now, Right now, that brother is in a hospital fighting for his life. Okay, that brother's in a hospital fighting for his life, and you have others that are dead. And the key here is to keep brothers and sisters alive so that they can fight another day. Fight another day. An effective fight.
And we know there's profit in injustice and profit in poverty. And, you know, there are some people that practice in my industry, and you know them, Ed, and I know them, they say, yo, what the hell are you talking about, Royce? Keep your mouth shut. This is how
profiting off of people's misery.
This is how I pay the bills. You know what? There's other ways to pay the bills. You know, this could be an academic course that are in schools. You know what I mean? We can teach around the world. We can go to nonprofit and profit organizations. We can go in corporate America and we can teach what is going on. This doesn't have to be one of those situations where, you know, we're going to reap off of the poor and poverty, and we're going to reap off of injustices and injustice in America. It just doesn't have to be that way.
It doesn't. And, you know, we're at the top of the show, top of the hour, closing out the show today. And I just really appreciate all of you. Hey, Jason. Hey, Shawnee. Thanks for putting in the information about the book. It's also scrolling on the screen. You can go to cardiacarrestbook.net. You can contact Ed at lawoffice@edpichardo.com. You can contact Mr. Russell at Royce Russell, Esquire.com. The information is here. You have access to 2 attorneys who do this every day, all day. This is what they live, they breathe. Their passion is for our community. This is where the legal meets the cultural. They have the professional training to do this work, but they have the heart of passion of being Black and brown members of society. So they understand how things are not always equal for us in our community. So we appreciate you tuning in. We thank you for sharing this broadcast and letting others know that we're here. We're here to inform you and educate you. We have a lot more to delve into come next week, and we're praying for everyone's safety. We know there's another hurricane that is hitting the United States, so we're praying that we don't have a repeat of what has happened in the past. And we're also still praying for everyone to be safe, because the coronavirus, COVID-19, is not over. So folks are getting comfortable. They're getting relaxed. Let's make sure we're responsible with wearing our masks, remaining in the social distance capacities, and just being safe, because we are not over all of what we're facing in 2020. So we have a responsibility not only to our immediate family, but to our community. So thank you all once again for being here. Jason said, always follow the dollar. The profit machine makes money on both sides, just like the pharmaceuticals. Absolutely. Hey, my brother. Deborah, thank you. Love what you do, Brother Royce. And we appreciate you, Shawnee. Thank you so much for showing up and being here. Richard, you are here all the time, supporting and being a part of the show, and we appreciate all of you. So stay tuned. The conversation continues. If there's something that you want Mr. Russell or Mr. Pichardo to focus on specifically in the upcoming show, just write it in the comments so that we're able to put that in our preparation and give you the additional knowledge that you require. Any final remarks, gentlemen, before we close out?
I just want to, in recognition of Women's Equality Day today, I want people to look up an interesting bit of history on the Leesburg Stockade. These heroic young girls during the Civil Rights era that endured incarceration for 45 days, and their parents didn't even know they were being held in that place. Look it up, Leesburg Stockade, Leesburg, Georgia. Just want to leave on that note. Power to the sisters in our lives, and power to them today, August 26th, and see you later. Peace.
What I just want to leave everybody with is, and I've been saying it all day, let's leave prepared, let's leave protected, and let's leave powerful. That's it. Let's do that. And if we do that, then I'll meet you down the block and around the corner.
Absolutely. And I am, because they were. So Women's Equality Day is every day for me. All right, everyone. See you next week.